believe we are. Yeah, we are.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, 1 second. 1 second. He's giving us the 1 second sign.
Okay.
Okay, we're go.
All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for tuning in to tonight's Planning Commission workshop. I'm Marty Dahl. I'm Community and Economic Development Director for the City of Victoria. We value our residents and community members, and even though the doors to Victoria City Hall are temporarily closed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, we want to make sure that our public meetings can continue in an open and transparent. State statutes allow the city to conduct meetings by telephone, and the Victorian City Council recently took action to allow our council and commission meetings to temporarily take place remotely during this pandemic emergency. As a result, we've temporarily are modifying how we will receive public comment on planning commission items. During meetings that do not have a public hearing, comments should be sent to the planning commission electronically via email or using our online form. The online form can be found at victoria.civicweb.net/portal under the meeting participation heading. Again, that's victoria.civicweb.net/portal. You can also email Senior Planner Paul Moretto at pmoretto@ci.victoria.mn.us. That is PMORETTO@ci.victoria.mn.us. During future meetings that will include public hearings, we intend to provide the ability for those wishing to speak to do so via conference call. As this is a workshop, there are no action items and no public hearings, so no dial-in telephone number is available. Those of you watching us live online or on Mediacom Channel 8, please be aware of the following. A quorum of the Planning Commission is participating in this meeting remotely. We are broadcasting and streaming this meeting live, and there is up to a 1-minute delay from the live meeting to the online and cable broadcast. This is a new process for us all. We thank you all for your patience and constructive feedback as we work through this unprecedented situation. We're working hard to ensure that your voice can still be heard while maintaining everyone's health and safety. Thank you, and with that, I will turn it over to Chair Stensland.
Thank you, Marty. With that, I'm now calling this workshop of the Victoria Planning Commission to order. This workshop is to provide an orientation for our new members of the Planning Commission, as well as a good refresher for those of us who have been longer-term members. This is a bit of a unique situation as we are doing this meeting remotely due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we will consider this our test run for conducting meetings in the future. We have our new Community and Economic Development Director, Marty Dahl, as well as Senior Planner Paul Moretto on the line tonight to give us a presentation. With that, I will turn the meeting over to Marty and Paul.
Thank you, Chair Stensland. Paul or Alyssa, could you advance the slides, please? So first of all, welcome. As you said, this is our inaugural test of trying a little different way of doing these public meetings. So this is a good opportunity for us to just provide some information with the new Planning Commission year in place. You can see on your screen our list of current Planning Commission members and their appointed date, as well as our 2 alternate members who are, one of whom is on the line for this orientation, the other who will join us at 6 o'clock today. If you want to advance the slide, please. This is contact information for both Paul Moretto, Senior Planner, and myself, the Community and Economic Development Director here for the City of Victoria. Paul will remain the primary liaison for the Planning Commission, though I envision that I will be involved as well going forward. So I'm excited to be here, excited to have this first meeting. Even though I don't get to see all of your smiling faces in person, I'm glad that we're all here and able to connect virtually and that everybody's staying safe and healthy. Next slide, please. Just a quick rundown of our agenda. We don't have a ton of time for this workshop tonight. We are planning to try and conclude right around 6 o'clock so we can get into our regular meeting. But the points we'll be trying to go over tonight are just a little virtual meeting overview, since that is the current situation we find ourselves in. A little chat about our live broadcasts and recordings. how to find agendas, minutes, and video on iCompass, an overview of the Planning Commission Handbook update that you should have received via email earlier this week. And then I will turn it over to Paul, who will talk about what is the Planning Commission, some open meeting law items using and accessing our online city code, and some planning and zoning 101. And if we have time before 6 o'clock, we'll open it up for any questions. Otherwise, both of us will be happy to answer questions at a later time as well. Next slide, please. So the first thing is just a quick overview of the virtual meetings, one of which we are conducting right now. We are using the WebEx platform. There's a number of platforms that are getting a ton of use the last several weeks as people are working remotely. We are currently using WebEx. This is also what our City Council and what our Parks and Recreation Commission will be using, at least for the foreseeable future. As you can tell through this meeting, we've got audio and video share capabilities, screen share, and we will be providing public call-in numbers anytime we have public hearings or we are asking for public input on an item. Just a couple of tips as we go through these virtual meetings. If you can use your video, people would like to see your faces. Be aware of your background, just so you know, we've all seen the videos on YouTube and on Facebook of unwanted folks in the background, so just be aware of your background when we're doing these public meetings. Please mute yourselves when not talking, just to avoid some background noise, and remember to unmute yourself when speaking. Anytime you will be speaking, because we can't necessarily see you right away, please state your name so everyone knows who is speaking, and then please listen for prompts by either the chair or staff as we move through meetings in this virtual setting. And then the last piece of important information is, remember, we are streaming and recording these meetings so that the public can view them live and watch them at a later date. Next slide, please. So live from Victoria, it's Planning Commission Live, whether virtual or in person. Just a couple of tips for the recording portion of the meetings is always be aware of your nonverbals and any side conversations going on when you're up on the dais. You can kind of always assume that the cameras and the microphones are live, so always be cautious of your nonverbals or any side conversations, just to make sure that if it's something you don't necessarily want picked up on camera, it doesn't get picked up on camera. We talked about being aware of your background for virtual meetings. Please try to speak clearly and directly, in this case, into your phone or your device. When we get to rejoin up at the dais, your microphone is the same way. Please try to speak into that directly so that the folks in the room and at home can hear you. And as I mentioned, always assume that cameras and microphones are on. For the folks at home, there's a couple of different ways that they can watch these meetings. We are streaming or broadcasting out on Mediacom cable on channel 8. Our iCompass portal, which I'll show you in just a minute, is kind of a one-stop shop for agendas and minutes and video for the public and in fact for staff and Planning Commission use as well. And then our videos are available live streaming later on YouTube. Next slide, please. So this is our iCompass portal. This is, as I mentioned, a one-stop shop for public meeting agendas, minutes, and videos. If you have not been out to this site yet, I would encourage you to do so at some point. And then Paul or Alyssa, if you can click on that link and see if we can actually open up the page quickly. We'll see if this works. So this is what that portal looks like when you're actually out on the website. So you'll see a few different tabs up towards the top. Our home screen here is very much related to the COVID-19 pandemic and how people can still participate and view meetings. We've got a calendar tab up towards the top that will show upcoming meetings as well as the upcoming meetings list on the right-hand side. If you click into that meetings tab, that will give you a breakdown of all of the different public meetings that the agendas and minutes are video are available in this system. And you'll see any of the, I'm pointing at my screen, realizing none of you can see me what I'm pointing at. If you can see any of the meetings that have that little camera off to the right-hand side, that means that the video is available there as well. So when you click on those meetings, if they've already taken place, you'll be able to find the agendas, the staff backgrounds, the minutes, the video. So if you're ever looking to refresh yourself on a conversation that was had, this is a good place to start.
Marty, this is Mary Jo with a question.
Yes.
Even with my glasses on, I can't read the screen.
It's a little difficult because we are going through the WebEx portal. So you're seeing a smaller version of it through the WebEx. If you actually go out to the website, it'll be much easier to read. It's very condensed because we're showing it to you through this WebEx.
Would you repeat the website again? The name?
Yes. It is victoria.civicweb.net/portal.
Easy. Thank you.
You bet. And we can jump back to the PowerPoint. The last thing I think that I have to touch on before I will turn it over to Paul is, as I mentioned, I did send a PDF version of the updated Planning Commission handbook to everyone yesterday, I believe. So we did try to reduce some of the paper that we've provided in the past, where we've printed out the entire code book, because these are all available online and you'll find the most up to date if there are any code or ordinance changes online, and we've provided the links within this book, as well as some additional resources that you might find handy as you do your work on the Planning Commission. If anyone does need a paper copy of any of these items that we've just linked to, just let Paul or I know. We'll make arrangements to get a printed copy, but we figured we would start with giving access so you can find those things online, and then make those paper copies as needed. So just a quick rundown of what you'll find in that book. We've got the ordinance that actually establishes the Planning Commission, state statute that talks about the role of planning commissions. We have a how to access the City of Victoria Municipal and Zoning Code. So we've got links to those codes and the zoning code, as well as the appropriate municipal code sections that you guys might find handy. We've got a link to our 2040 comprehensive plan, a link to our community development website, our downtown Victoria parking study, our Victoria Works small area plan, a link to that, as well as links to our zoning maps, our county GIS map, and our downtown west and current downtown plans and visions, and then some additional more generalized citizen planner and Minnesota open meeting law, more general information for folks. So please take a look at that when you have an opportunity. Next slide, please. That is all that I have for my part of the presentation. Before I turn it over to Paul, are there any questions? All right. Thank you, Paul. Take it away.
Thank you, Marty. Well, good to see everyone again. It's been a while since we've had a Planning Commission meeting, and it's good to be able to talk to our existing members and our new members. The purpose of this next portion is to just kind of familiarize new members with some of the functions and activities, tips and tricks for our new members, but also a little refresher for our existing members as well. So on this first slide here, we're going to talk a little bit about what the Planning Commission is and what its duties and roles are. And then we'll go into some tips and tricks, and then a little bit of 101. First and foremost, the City of Victoria Planning Commission is the hearing body of the city. So for things like variances, conditional use permits, administrative decisions, zoning changes, comprehensive plan amendments, revisions, this body hears those issues and makes recommendations to the City Council. Municipal Code Article 101 establishes the Planning Commission as the agency of the planning agency of the city, and again is responsible for those hearings. Next slide, please. A quick little tip and trick deals with open meeting laws. It's something that we take pretty seriously here in the city. We want to make sure everybody is somewhat familiar with them. Really the point of the open meeting law is to provide transparency to the public, and so this is a public body, and so they obviously are able to engage and participate in the decisions and decision-making process. A couple of things to think about when thinking about open meeting law is meetings must be public. It can't be done without the public having access to it. That's why, like for today, we have our online resources we're providing to the public. We're making sure that's available, and it's going to be recorded so that the public can review it at a later time as well. It's important that we make sure not to have a quorum, meaning in this body we have 7 members that are voting members. That means if there's 4 or more, it becomes quorum, and if it's outside the notice meeting, then we can't have that, so make sure not to do that. We want to make sure not to engage in anything like chain meetings. What that means is that you can't have a conversation with one person that's a planning commissioner and then have a separate conversation with another one on the same topic, and then you essentially make quorum that way. So we want to avoid that when all possible. Make sure not to reply all or to reply to other members via email. Again, that could be considered part of an open meeting law issue. And also, we want to make sure not to engage in what's called ex parte communication, meaning that all communication between the applicant and commission members and council members should be done in the open public forum. We give on things like variances or conditional use permits, those sorts of things with applications. We give the applicant the ability to speak before the commission and councils to be able to make their case, and the members of the body can make their decisions when that comes. All right, next slide, please. The link we have before us here is a link to our municipal code. This is a rather important document for our planning commission. It's something that we should be reviewing frequently and referring to as often as we can. If we could link to that quickly, please. As you can see, this link here brings us to 2 code books. The first code book is the Municipal Code. In the code, you'll find chapters 105 and 107, which pertain directly to the Planning Commission. 105 is our environmental ordinance, which has our tree preservation and some of our more natural resource protection items. We also have 107, which is our subdivision ordinance, which is something that we will be reviewing often and regularly because we're a growing community that does a lot of subdivision and development. In there, you want to review all the different portions, and we can do this also during other sessions, and we always, in our staff reports, refer to those necessary items. Under our zoning code, we have things that are more, that are in higher resolution, so we'll have things like shoreline ordinance regulations, we'll have items like residential zoning regulations, fences, pools, those sorts of things. So if we get into a situation where we're looking at, say, a variance to a code, it'll usually come out of the zoning code because somebody will maybe ask for a 2-foot variance from our code for, say, setbacks or a little extra impervious surface coverage. That's what we'll be referring to for those sorts of items. So please go through each one. We can go through again in a later time as well and go over some of those specific items, but it's good homework for later. Next slide, please. Thank you. Something to think about, the Planning Commission takes two forms. Often it takes either what's called the legislative form or the quasi-judicial form. When we think of legislative form, we think of making laws. So things like zoning code amendments. For example, if we no longer wish to have a certain height of fence, or say we want, in general, larger setbacks for certain districts, we'd go through the zoning amendments and we go through the legislative process. For a comprehensive plan, similar, we would look to amend it or to update it every 10 years. And that'd go through our legislative process, again, with hearings and those sorts of things. We also have what's called quasi-judicial processes. These are things like variances, conditional use permits, and zoning. These are items where the commission acts kind of like a judge, and they make decisions based off of the finding of fact and of the best decision that each member can make, and then a vote is taken to decide on the issue. And these sorts of items are items that we want to make sure that when an applicant comes before the commission, no prejudgment is made on the issue, but rather it's done in an open forum for making decisions. Next slide, please. The graphic we have before us here is what's considered to be the commission triangle of discretion. Some of us have already seen this and some of us have not. At the bottom of the triangle, we have things like comprehensive plans and zoning ordinances. This is where the Planning Commission can make its greatest discretion and have more creativity in the process. And we'll go over each one separately as we go through the presentation. But just to think that we think of comprehensive plan and zoning ordinances, when we go to make them through the legislative process, think creativity. As we go into the subdivision applications, conditional use and variances, we're thinking about applying practice and standards. This is, again, our more quasi-judicial roles. Here we have some discretion, such as adding certain conditions that are tied to the project for the permit, or having certain conditions on the subdivision application, but rather there are some rules of the road. As we get further up the triangle, we see things like administrative issues like plan review and building permits. Oftentimes this won't come before the Planning Commission, although it's possible they could. This is where there's strict and very rigid requirements that have to be observed and reviewed. And this is where it's more about process than it is about creativity. And so next slide, please. So as we think about that bottom of the triangle, we think about comprehensive plans and ordinances. Speaking specifically to the comprehensive plan, this is revised every 10 years, and this is kind of the master document for the city. It outlines the long-term goals and aspirations of the city. This often includes a planning commission, steering committees, and city council, which have discretion and provide creativity in the process. And when we think about how the city wants to move forward, we think of this document to help us out. We think zoning code and ordinances as well, again, under that more discretion. We think of rules of the city. We think of standards it sets for residents, owners, visitors, and developers that want to work and play and develop in the city. The Planning Commission works with staff, the council, and the community to develop good rules to help guide all aspects of development and also of our properties. Specifically, Planning Commission recommends changes to the council. Next slide, please. So thinking about the process of a subdivision, because that's something that will come along quite often. Actually, we have an application coming in soon. We want to think about first step is the sketch plan. Developers provide a rough idea of their proposal. It may have some lots, it may have some rough designs, some topography, but usually these are pretty in the starter aspect. They're at the basic level. Oftentimes we have a public process, a public meeting beforehand to help gauge the community's desires and needs before it reaches the Planning Commission, so those could be included. The Planning Commission and City Council provide feedback. The developer should use these opportunities to create the best plan going forward, which should take place in the next item, which is the preliminary plat. This usually takes about 60 days or so, and no voter action is required from either the Commission or the Council. Next slide, please. The next item is preliminary plat. This is a more, this is the submission from the developer for an actual plat process. Developer submits an application with full plans of the project. It should be well thought out at this point. Staff reviews and provides feedback to determine if the application is complete. Now, what that means is that the application has all the components that we can use to determine that they have enough to bring forward to the Planning Commission. This doesn't mean that it's the best version of their application, but rather that it meets all the requirements of a complete application. At this point, staff often puts in a notice for a hearing in the official paper and is mailed to residents within 350 feet. Staff works with the developer in the meantime to develop their, to improve their project to a point where we are all comfortable that it's ready to go. The Planning Commission conducts a hearing for the public to provide comments and feedback. They also make a motion to recommend approval or denial to the council. In either way, there should be a finding of fact. But particularly if denied, a letter of denial with findings of fact should be forwarded to the council, because this is something that needs to be considered with great weight. There is what's called the 60-day, 120-day rule to approve or deny. What that means is that in most cases, the city has 60 days. In cases where it's not feasible to complete an application for approval or denial within 60 days, we ask for 120 days from the developer, and that's usually automatically provided. And if it hasn't been decided within the 120 days, it automatically gets approved. Next slide, please. Along with the subdivision process, we have the final plat. This is the final product. This final plat should be very similar to the preliminary plat. If there are substantial differences between the two, then it should go back to the pre-plat process. Once the final plat is approved, the construction process then begins. And again, we can go through more of this at a later time as well. We'll see examples of this in the near future. We can have a Q&A on that as well. Next slide, please. Another part of the Planning Commission that happens from time to time are conditional uses and variances. These are special exemptions from the normal building and zoning code. The process is similar for both applications. The Planning Commission conducts a hearing and reviews the findings of fact to determine if the application should be approved. The Planning Commission may apply conditions to serve the public need and can be directly connected to the need. So it can't be arbitrary or capricious. So for example, if there is a building height variance requested on a fence, then a requirement couldn't be that you plant 12 trees on your neighbor's lawn. Like that doesn't make any sense. So we want to make sure that our conditions meet the purpose and intent of what's being asked for. Again, there's a 60-day, 120-day rule to approve it or not, or the other.
Paul, can you give an example where the city would need up to 120 days to approve a conditional use permit? We've never encountered that many days necessary, to my knowledge, and so I'm just kind of curious if you could give a scenario where you need that much time.
It probably wouldn't be as often for the conditional use permit. I think where you'd run into it is if there was an issue with the findings of fact. So say they put an application for a land use, so like a setback issue or something of that nature, and it's covered or it's not accessible, and we need more time in order to gain access to the property or to analyze the situation. That may be a reason why you would, but again, for a conditional use, it's less common. Variances, slightly more common. Plat, much more common.
Yeah, okay.
So that's a good question.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. Again, continuing on this theme, when we speak about variances, again, these are requests for deviations or a variance from the normal zoning code. For example, you want to build a shed a little closer to the building line, or if you have a project that requires you to have a little more impervious surface than what was originally allotted to your property. These variances are special requirements that must be passed. They take what's called a three-part test to satisfy what's called a practical difficulty. These items include that the use of the property be in a reasonable manner. The circumstance must be unique to the property. Again, that's very important. The circumstance must be unique to the property. It also must maintain the essential character of the locality, meaning that, you're not asking for a space launch pad in the middle of a residential district. That doesn't make any sense. It's not maintaining the character. Of course, that's hyperbole, and most people won't do that, but just to kind of prove the point here. Again, these can be a little subjective. Again, this falls underneath what's called the quasi-judicial. That means you're making judgments about this. And there may be a lot of discussion regarding these issues. Other factors that are to be considered, that the item must be in harmony with the purpose of the ordinance. So, for example, a 1-foot variance may be in harmony with the purpose of a setback, but 100% removal may not. Again, it depends on the situation, but we have to kind of judge that. Also, it must be consistent with the comprehensive plan, meaning that if they have a request that's just completely outside the bounds of what the comprehensive plan guides, for example, you want a little more impervious surface to increase the density of the project, but increasing the density pushes it outside of the recommended land use items for the comprehensive plan. It may not be consistent with the comprehensive plan anymore, and so maybe that variance doesn't make any sense. And so again, these are things that have to be judged at the time of the hearing and must be considered. A special note that economic considerations cannot be a determining factor. So if somebody were to come to one of our meetings and say, well, it's going to cost me a lot of money. Well, that may be the case, but unfortunately that's not a determining factor. It can be it's obviously a factor, but it cannot be the determining factor in deciding whether or not this application should go forward. Next slide, please. A couple items to think about when you think about yourself as now a planning commissioner. Obviously, you're now in the public. You're part of the public eye. You're an important asset to the community in the sense that you make decisions with land use and long-term plans, and that because of that, each commissioner is held to the highest standard. What is said or written about in city business is also public record. But again, this has to do with making sure we're having open meetings. Business of the commission must be done as an open meeting. The chair runs the meeting and enforces all the rules. So when the chair says stop, or when the chair wants to move the conversation forward, usually the planning commission moves that way. Meetings start at 6 p.m. on the first and third Tuesdays of each month. If you cannot make a meeting, please let staff know. Attendance is important. If we can't make quorum, then that means that we might hit one of those 60 or 120-day issues. We don't want to have the public miss the opportunity to engage in the process. Always remember that quorum in this body is 4 members of the commission or more. You know, if for whatever reason you're going to be at a meeting or at a situation where 4 or more will be, then we need to make sure to notice it and to make sure that it's accessible to the public. Hearings. So when an applicant comes forward and there's a hearing, remember that these are times for understanding. It's the time for asking questions and forming a decision. Wait until after the hearing before taking a position. That's very important because we want to make sure that we haven't made prejudgments about what's being asked of the commission before they've had an opportunity to speak to the commission. With that, I believe that finishes my portion as well. I guess this would be a time for our Q&A.
Paul, before we jump into questions, just one more thing to add, and I believe that all of our planning commissioners are probably aware of it, but just for anybody who might be watching this at home, the reason that we do have 2 alternate members of the planning commission is because there are items like those 60 and 120-day timeline issues that are required by state statute that the city take action. So if a planning commissioner, regular planning commissioner, is unable to attend a meeting, those alternates can vote in their place.
Thank you. Yeah, with that, we can take some questions.
Paul, we have a couple new folks on the panel here. Would it be a good time for them to introduce themselves?
Sure, that's a fantastic idea. Who would like to go first?
I can go. I'm Terry Schwarting. I got to work on the video aspect. I'm on my iPhone and then just kind of watching it on a computer, but that computer doesn't have a camera. Of course, without professional makeup, it's probably better off that you can't see me. But I was an alternate for a portion last year, so I know many of the faces here and look forward to working with everybody.
Thank you.
This is Christian. I've been a 17-year resident of Victoria, been on the Park and Rec Board for 3 years, and felt it was time for somebody else to get a chance to be on that. And looked at the Planning Commission and thought it would be a fun challenge and something to keep involved with the city.
Excellent, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do you have any additional questions? All right, well, hearing no additional questions, we've got about 10 minutes until we convene our regular Planning Commission meeting at 6 o'clock. As I've mentioned, we will have members of our Lakes and Water Quality Committee joining us to hear the presentation from the DNR. They should start jumping on the line shortly. If you would like to stay connected through so you don't need to hop back on again in 10 minutes, feel free to do so. You can turn your microphone off or turn your video off if you'd like, just to stay blank until we reconvene again at 6. Chair Stensland, for those that are joining us, if any of the members of the public are speaking or are viewing, I've got a modified version of my little spiel that I gave before the workshop that I will give again at 6 o'clock, and then we'll turn it over to you to open the meeting. I think you may be muted still, Chair Stensland.
Sounds good. I look forward to it. Since this is a planning workshop, do we need to officially close this? I can just close this meeting, correct?
Correct.
All right, well, we'll close this meeting. We will reconvene in 10 minutes. Thank you.